I saw one of your videos about stretching and how doing isometrics both works the nervous system. Can you get a bit into that? Because I've been stretching almost every day for the past year, and I really wanna. I have a goal of getting the splits, so I would love
Mm,
some
yeah.
new tips on that.
Sure. Did you try that exercise that I gave in the video where you reach down towards your toes
With
and then
the hands between the knees. I
yeah,
have not
yeah,
done that yet. I literally just saw the video before we talked, actually. So
sure.
yeah.
That's such a it's such a weird thing to experience. And to those listening, it's really easy to do. So basically just kind of like bend over, try to touch your toes, stretching your hamstrings, and then hold it for a few moments. And then take your fists, put them next to each other, and squeeze your fists between your knees. And then after about 5 seconds of that, then go back into the stretch, and you're going to find you can get way deeper from that. And that's it's just a little quirky party trick that I learned at a conference one time, but it illustrates the point that when we're looking at how our muscles are working, our muscles are driven by our nervous system. It's not driven by the exercise you do or the weight in your hand or anything like that. Those are just the vehicles, right? Your muscles and how they perform and act and behave are driven by your nervous system. So, training the nervous system is a far more direct way to get the muscles into the condition we want and need them to be. And one of the quickest and easiest ways to do that is with the discipline of overcoming isometrics. That's when you're putting force against something that you can't move. Classic example would be like if you got into a squat rack, and there's a barbell about chest height, and you load it up with like a gazillion pounds that you couldn't possibly lift, and then you just push your back against it as hard as you possibly could. That's an overcoming isometric, as opposed to a yielding isometric where you'd take like 135 on the squat rack, you'd squat down and hold it there. You have a finite amount of resistance. So, and that's great. But an overcoming isometric is one where you're always matching force and resistance equally. So the harder you push into that immovable force, the more it pushes back and vice versa. So the beauty of overcoming isometrics is that it is a very quick and very efficient way to train your nervous system to use your muscles better in every way, shape, and form: strength, connectivity, synergy, stability, balance, like everything. But a lot of times when it comes to the mobility component, the mobility of our muscles depends very much on how well you can contract the muscle and how well they are stable in a position. Because if we are trying to improve our mobility, we need to create a very stable environment that the muscle feels confident in. As a physical therapist friend of mine always said, muscles are like dogs. When they're big and they're strong, they're just silent and they're confident. They're like, woof, like I could take you, no big deal kind of thing. But when they're small and they're tiny and they're weak, they make a lot of noise, like the
Hmm.
little, chihuahua dog, like kind of thing. So you'll find that your biggest, strongest muscles that you've inevitably trained over the years, those are usually also the most mobile muscles. Those are the ones that are the easiest to get into a stretch. My calves are a big example for that. My chest, if I get into a chest stretch, I can just feel that stretch, really big, open, mobile. Oh, that feels real good kind of thing, because they're big and they're strong and they're confident. But my hips, on the other hand, are tight as hell
Hmm.
because they're small, tight, and weak, just because I haven't really used them a whole lot. So being able to engage the muscles at will with a lot of force, ironically enough, is the pathway to building up what I call that muscle confidence. And the more confident the muscles are, the easier they are to stretch, the easier they are to use at elongated lengths, and the more mobile they're inevitably going to be.
That's so cool. I've never heard this before. What kind of isometric could I do in between my splits, for example?
So a lot of times the adduction for the splits is also a touch hamstring related,
Hmm.
because you've got quite a bit of adductors, and many of the adductors in your legs are also either hip flexors or hip extensors as well. So a lot of times that's why splits alone don't really do a whole lot for a lot of people, because if you also have weak extension and flexion, which is most people because we sit a lot, then you're always going to be at a bit of a loss because you're working on one plane of motion, but you need multiple planes of motion to a degree. If you want to look up the anatomy, you've got your adductor magnus, which is one of the biggest adductors you've got. That's also an extensor. So if you're doing things like deadlifts and stuff, that's heavily involved with that. You've got your adductor magnus, I just mentioned, brevis and longus, which are more in the front or the anterior side of your humerus, and that also aids in flexion. And so a good thing that you might want to try is with the overcoming isometrics of just pushing your leg against a wall. Try and explain this. So you're going to face the wall, and you're going to stand about 2 feet away from it. And you're going to have both your legs straight. You're going to push your toes of one leg up into the wall about a foot high up on the wall. And that's your flexors. So you're going to have that working. That's your flexors. You're going to feel your tensor fasciae lata really work up. It's really good for like IT band issues as well. But that's also going to get your adductor longus and brevis. And so that's going to warm those up. Then you face your back to the wall and you push your heel against the wall. And that's going to also get that adductor magnus. And so you also might want to have a slight squeezing impact with your feet as well. So you're not just pushing straight into the wall, but you're kind of almost squeezing your feet together a little bit. Actually, now that I think about it, an easier way to do this might just to stand. Like you could do this anytime. Stand with your feet about shoulder width apart. Put your toes apart from each other so they're pointing out slightly, and just squeeze the floor as hard as you can. And that's going to get your adductor magnus to a large degree. And then just point your toes in a little bit and squeeze, and that'll get your longus and your brevis. And that's just going to be a good overcoming isometric for your adductors. And then you just practice that throughout the day. You know, I can even do it now as I'm talking to you because you're just standing there. If you can do that, that'll improve that tension control in those muscles. Then with that strength and that confidence, when you're doing your splits, you should notice it's going to be a much more of an easier stretch as opposed to if the muscle is not all that strong as far as that neural drive goes, you're going to notice it's not really so much of a stretch. It's kind of like you've hit a limit. Like you're moving your legs out and there's just this very hard stop. It doesn't feel like you're stretching a rubber band. It's kind of like you're just trying to pull apart a hockey puck. You know, it doesn't stretch. It just stops. And I always told this to friends. I'm like, I don't know what's wrong with my mobility. Like, because they say stretch, but it doesn't feel like a stretch. It just feels like I'm hitting a limit, a hard limit, and that's it. So the stronger you can make your muscles and the more you can get that neural drive to improve that muscular confidence, the more your muscles are going to be comfortable stretching. And the more comfortable they are stretching, the more confident they are, the more they will allow the stretch to happen. And you're going to get a much deeper squat as well, or split as well.